And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Joining me on the line tonight is my good friend, Julien DeMarco. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Oh, well, great to have you back here. First show of the year for us here, Frankly Speaking. And Julien, let's just do a roundtable kind of thing. Let's go around and different things that are kind of coming up lately. I was cruising the internet yesterday and I came across a clip with Bill Maher, notorious far left liberal. He was doing a conversation with a gentleman called Brian Cranston. I think he's some type of entertainer. Two white males talking about liberalism and the great effects liberalism has had to uplift people, specifically in America, throughout history. Particularly, they mentioned the idea of Donald Trump running again and the entire MAGA movement, which they equate to something akin to let's make America great again, is really let's make America white again. And I found that an interesting conversation where two white liberals, well, they were kind of, I don't know, it seems like this white knight kind of a moment where they're going to come to the rescue of all these disenfranchised minorities historically, Julien. And what I can't get over, and what's confusing for me being Italian, is that the word white is constantly thrown around, which I don't understand who's somebody from European descent. Because in Europe, we talk about culture, right? We have Italian culture, we have Croatian culture, we have German culture. But the term white is so generic. And to hear liberals in America generically throw an entire class of people into the category of whiteness and then proclaim about all this great tragedy throughout American history, it's something, Julien, that's never felt quite right with me. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, honestly, I think it's internalized racism. I think it is white knight. You are very correct about that. It is white knighting. And I'm there is a small segment, very loud segment, that do believe, the whole MAGA is a dog whistle, if you will, for Make America White. But I don't think Trump in any way, shape, or form believes that's what his movement is about, or anybody in the high up positions in Trump's circle. There may be a few people on the fringe of Trump's circle, but that's not what the movement is about. Now, again, I'm not a Republican, so it doesn't really mean much to me. But what I do care about is honesty, and to say that the MAGA movement is about making America white again, I just think is foundly just it's white knighting and it's internalized racism, and quite frankly, it's just flat out wrong and sly.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Again, as somebody who's a byproduct of immigration, somebody whose family was not here through a lot of the terrible trials that Black Americans faced back during the time of slavery and segregation. My family wasn't here, so I have no context by which I can really, judge it by. I'm just an outsider in many ways when it comes to that. I just find it interesting how in America we keep coming back to this. Now, as I studied history, I think the plight of Blacks in America and the history of slavery, segregation is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy, I think, that oftentimes, even on the political right who are trying to defend America because the left is so kooky and always looking to really bash America because of these issues, I'm one that believes that Blacks did face a lot of tragedy in this country, and it's okay to acknowledge that. Now, how far we go correcting that, Julien, I don't have a stake in this because I wasn't part of this. And I think there's a lot of Americans that have a history like I do, whose families weren't here, and how we rectify this is very confusing for a lot of us, considering For example, a lot of us, like myself, I come from really poor peasant Sicilian backgrounds. We had our own struggles in our own country. So, but here you got the white liberals that are always making sure that we pound this anti-American, anti, founding, anti-Anglo sort of perspective into the political discourse, Julian.
Because America is obsessed with race. It's obsessed. America likes to go on and on and on about its greatest sin, slavery and racism. Well, I have news for you. Slavery still exists to this day. It hasn't ended. It has ended in the Western world, in Europe and in America, but slavery is still alive and well in Africa and in Asian countries. But America is obsessed with its history when it comes to race. It is obsessed. It is its greatest sin. And it is also its greatest weapon because they constantly, every single time there is an issue of any importance, they
Yeah.
always have to make it about race. And, you know, when we were all in lockdown, what happened? Everybody was getting upset about being in lockdown, the overreach of the government. But what happened? They made it about race. They made it about race. They made it about George Floyd. They made it about Black Lives Matter. This country was at a tipping point where, people's freedoms and liberties and livelihoods were, coming, undone. The world was coming undone. But what did they do? They made America anyway, made it about race. Don't pay attention to the fact that you're all locked down. Let's just bring out race. Let's make it all about race. Now, I'm not going to say that, as a person of color, that these things aren't, I'm not trying to downplay. What I am trying to do is put things in perspective. And this country is more, everybody likes to talk about how this country has made so much progress, but yet it seems this country is more racist than ever before, even though it elected a black president not once but twice. But yet somehow this country now in 2023 is more racist than it ever has been.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because I think we have made tremendous strides in regards to race in this country. I mean, listen, there's stories about Catholics and even Sicilians, back in the early 1900s that were, well, they faced lots of discrimination, just to put it very mildly there. And so we've all come a long way. Now, granted, that's nothing compared to what Black Americans faced at one time, and I totally acknowledge that. I just think it's interesting how we use this generic white term in America because you won't hear that in Europe, will you?
No, not necessarily. I mean, in Europe, you're not white. You're just wherever you're from. You're either Polish, you're French, you're English, you're Scottish, you're Welsh, you're German, you're in Italy, you're either, Roman or you're Sicilian or you're from the Tuscan region. First off, Italian is only used abroad. You're not Italian in Italy. You're Italian abroad. And you're whatever city or region you're in Italy. Just like in Britain, you're not British in Britain. You're British abroad and you're either Welsh, Scottish, or English or Northern Irish in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. That these are so but even but like people don't seem to understand. Even British people don't necessarily know this in Britain, that they just say, oh, I'm British. Well, you're British, yes, as a nationality, but British is a term to be used abroad. You're English or whatever in Britain. And, Italy is like one of those countries that still actually, use, their regional distinctions of where they're from. Because, as Italy has only been unified within living memory of some people.
Yeah.
Italy is not a unified country. It never has been. And I would say, even though it's, artificially unified now, it never will be truly unified in any real sense.
Yeah.
Like, like, like somebody living in France or Germany.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for Italians, unification happened in 1871. Prior to that, it was a bunch of city states, right? Which included Lombardy and included the Papal States. It included Sicily, things like that. And even after unification happened, you had this peninsula that was all put together with different traditions, customs, cultures, and languages. Italy really does not really become Italy until the reign of Mussolini comes along, where he kind of puts it all together through the ideology of fascism in many ways, and that's for another discussion. But you're absolutely right. I mean, everything prior to World War II, I think you could argue that there was still great divisions in terms of culture and language in Italy, and many people didn't even identify themselves as Italian. It was only after World War II does that really happen, and that's why, to me, this whole conversation of whiteness is strange, and I sense that there's some political machinations the left is using to continue to keep people divided in America. Because, like I said, when I look at a Polish person or a German person, I don't see them as white. I see them as Polish. I see them as German.
Well,
Very,
white is a very generic term. It's a term that removes cultural and ethnic
yes,
distinctions and national distinctions. It's white. If back in the day, it was no blacks, no Irish, no Italians. But today, you know, for example, Joe Biden is white, but he's Irish,
yeah,
supposedly. And if this was back, 70 something years ago, or a little long, he would have not have been able to get a job in a lot of places because it said no Irish
right.
and no Italians and no blacks. Well, he's white. Where's his white privilege? Why is there a sign outside saying no blacks, no Italians, and no Irish? So white only in recent terms, and I mean recent years, and what I mean recent, it's relative, and I'm talking about within the last 50 to maybe 60 years or so, white has widened to include a whole swath of people that it did not actually include originally. White
Right.
did not include Italians, Irish. It didn't include Spanish people, and I'm not talking about people from Latin America, from Mexico, or what. I'm talking about people from Spain. White was, you know, reserved particularly for white Anglo Protestant, particularly people from Britain, specifically England. It wasn't designated necessarily to, you know, Irish. Uh, you know, they we talk a lot about in this country the African slave trade. But what is not talked about is the Irish slave trade, which is just as bad. But what also is not talked about in this in American schools, whether it be high schools or universities, is the Muslim slave trade, which was 10 times worse than the transatlantic cattle slavery that brought blacks over here, some forcibly and some willingly. What also is not talked about is how blacks particularly Africans in Africa, aided and abetted the slavers. So a lot of these things are not talked about in universities or in high school. It just makes it out to be the white man bad and the blacks are just, down on their luck.
Yeah.
And so, and that's wrong. It's again, it's trying to keep this division of hatred between whites and blacks instead of actually just giving the facts of what actually happened. And the fact that England, for example, Britain, spent its entire national budget to police the seas, to end slavery in all, not just all of its empire, but around the world. They didn't end up paying off that debt until well into the 20th century.
Yeah.
They started to end slavery in the late early 1800s.
Right.
And they didn't pay off that debt until the 20th century.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yet you have people in England who are crying for reparations.
Okay. Well, listen, as somebody who grew up with a very diverse background, being born and raised in Los Angeles, I had a whole influx of friends as a youth of different races, color, creeds. Actually, most of my friends were, well, a lot of them were Black, Hispanics, Croatians, other Italians, obviously. And these kind of divisions that we continue to have in this country, I think it's an absolute setup for the political system to keep us angry and occupied while all kinds of nefarious things happen in the background of our political system.
It's divide and conquer 101.
Yeah, it is. And so it breaks my heart that we can't come together as Americans. But I'm not surprised because I've become so skeptical about our political discourse in America. So there you have it. So, Julian, next topic here. Latest story. Apparently, the FBI is looking into investigating traditional Catholics, claiming that, well, they possibly could be on the rise for possibly domestic violence. I believe I don't have the article in front of me, but they're claiming that. And listen, they gave out some big names here. They brought up the name of LifeSite News, The Remnant, E. Michael Jones, Tradition in Action. These are big time trad communities online, and they implicated them as possible, violence toward people of LGBT community. Who else was there? I think, of course, anti-Semitism and a few other categories, Julian. And while I'm not shocked, it's kind of interesting because, for all my critiques of the traditionalist movement, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think they're a terrorist organization, the trads, on the Catholic right. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, so I'm looking at the memo cited a study from the Anti-Catholic Southern Poverty Law Center. Okay, so the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is anti-Catholic, is a bunch of the Southern Poverty Law Center is nothing but a wacko, extreme leftist propaganda, whatever have you, whatever thing you want to say, it is that it is not to be trusted with anything. I wouldn't trust them with anything. I mean, they're just it's not, they're not worth anything. But I can say, I mean, the saying that, like, the people that you mentioned or the communities that you mentioned, again, I'm not too well versed on the topic. I just know it tangentially, and I have put up the article in question, and I'm just skimming it. But my what I can say about the whole anti-LGBT thing, they're saying that again, again, they're preparing the way that if you have, religious or spiritual or even you're not religious or spiritual. You just have a personal conviction against anything LGBT. It is a thought crime,
Yeah.
and therefore it is a actual crime, and therefore you are a terrorist or a domestic terrorist. And it's because you cannot hold this belief. If you hold this belief, whether it is from your religion or from your spirituality or just your own personal, you're an atheist and you don't believe in any of the LGBT nonsense, and it has nothing to do with any religious background whatsoever, you are a terrorist because you cannot hold those beliefs, because you are going to put people's lives in
Yeah.
danger, even though you don't plan on doing anything about it. If somebody asks, do you favor anything LGBT, and you say no, you are committing a crime because you did not say, oh yeah, I accept it and I approve of it. Because what they want is heterosexual people. It has gone beyond, tolerance and acceptance to now you have to celebrate it. Not only just celebrate it, you have to encourage it. Do you see the insanity here?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone from tolerating to acceptance to celebration to encouragement. Normal, sane, heterosexual people are now, by the state and just the culture and corporations, are to celebrate LGBT and encourage it, and if possible, engage. That
Yeah.
that makes no sense.
Yeah. I think what hit me the most was the claim of anti-Semitism. I think this is where there may be something to the claim. Okay. And I know I'm going to upset a lot of Catholics here, but um, there is a history that goes beyond America with sort of anti-Semitism and the Jewish question. Listen, I've been studying lots of World War II era, and the Jewish question has existed in Europe for probably 2,000 years, going all the way back to the time of Christ. And there is critiques both back and forth, not only of Christians criticizing Jews, but Jews criticizing Christians. So a lot of times in the Catholic communities, there is this historical narrative that goes back beyond America. But of course, somebody like these organizations here, they're not going to care about that because we're in America now, right? And so it's all about tolerance and diversity. We have to get over these historical differences. It's like when I talk to my classical liberal friends on the right, and I bring up the problems that Protestantism presents, how Catholics were discriminated early on in America. Oh, come on, Frank. We're over that. That's done. That's past history. We got the Republican Party big tent now where we've all come together. And I remind them there's a history there you just can't ignore. And so I will acknowledge that there is a history there of the Jewish question, right? But again, Julian, that goes back to European history more than anything else. And oftentimes it's a historical question more than it is anti-Semitism, which I think that word is flippantly thrown around anyways, Julian.
Well, I feel like to say, you're an anti-Semite it's also, like you said, it's flippantly thrown around, just as, being racist is thrown around so flippantly. Yeah. It has lost any semblance of meaning. I mean, for, to have the charge of being a racist, say, 30 years ago, that was a real charge. But today, everybody's called racist. Everybody and their mother is called racist. So the slightest thing, it means absolutely nothing anymore. And, the same thing, with, anti-Semitism. I think to be called an anti-Semite is losing, its bite as well, its power, because it's being thrown around so much. When you have the slightest critique of a person who, or a group of people that tend to be either of, the black people who happen to be black, or people who happen to be Jewish, and you happen to have a critique of them, or maybe a particular individual who happens to be Jewish, oh, it's because he's Jewish. Well, no, not necessarily. It's because of this, and that. And it just so happens he happens to be Jewish. It has nothing to do with him being Jewish. Or, oh, you just don't like because he's black. No, it's because of this, and this. And he just happens to be black. You can't, so you can't critique people anymore, especially somebody who happens to be, of a protected minority status.
Yeah, I think that's the trick there, right? And as we're trying to make this pluralism and this diversity thing work in America, it seems like it could only work when we're divided to a certain extent, or being divided to a certain extent. And as somebody myself, my wife is half Jewish, and my wife lost a loved one in the Holocaust. I'm very sympathetic toward the Jewish community in many ways, but that doesn't mean I don't see the sins they commit, just like the sins that I commit, or the sins that Catholics commit, or the sins that Protestants commit. When it comes to sins and right and wrong, I'm kind of like that equal opportunity kind of a guy. I just call it the way I see it. And I think there's certain groups that want to be immune to certain sins under the guise of freedom and liberty and democracy. And I think that's the essence of the problem, Julian.
I would say so.
Yeah. So
I would say so.
Yeah. So there you go there. Okay. Next story. Julian, are we being invaded by UFOs?
Okay, this I have not heard anything about, even in a tangentially way. Tangential way. No.
I don't know what to think of it, Julian. I have no idea what to think of it. So.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, so we can move on then.
Yeah, well, I do have this one thing. If we are being invaded by UFOs, and they do the whole "take me to your leaders" thing. What's the worst that can happen? I would rather take my chances with some, alien from another world than with what we have here. So it can only go up from here if there are aliens to take over. Right. That's my thing.
All right, that sounds good. Let's see, what else do we got here, Julian? It's Super Bowl. Did you watch Super Bowl?
I had plans on watching it, but I didn't watch it.
Okay, I didn't either.
What I do know is that Rihanna put on a good halftime performance.
Right.
I know that she was pregnant when she. I know that she's pregnant when she put on this performance. But what I also found out, and I was watching Candace Owens, and this shocked me, and Candace Owens was shocked as well, is that Rihanna apparently kept her clothes on the whole entire time.
She was modest. We haven't seen that in the Super Bowl in like decades.
Okay, so there was no Black Lives Matter. There was no Ukraine. She didn't sing the Ukrainian anthem. She didn't have here's my best friend, the devil. He's gonna sing some lyrics for me. She didn't have dry humping lesbians. She didn't have any trans. She didn't have kids doing weird dances. There wasn't ass cheeks all over the place. It was just Rihanna singing her hits. That was it. That's all she did. Yeah. She showed up, sung her hits, and then went on her way. And when I was listening to Candace Owens explain this, I was shocked just as much as she was, because because it is shocking, because you would expect ass cheeks and children doing weird things and half lesbian whatever, but no, it was just, or some political statement, or some LGBT statement. No, it was just her showing up all clothed, just singing music.
Yeah.
And as Candace Owens said, this is something that conservatives. She was talking about conservatives who are. This is why conservatives lose. She was explaining one of the reasons why conservatives lose is because conservatives are nitpicking at her, performance. And she was saying this is why conservatives lose the culture, because when you nitpick at a performance like this, where Rihanna does absolutely nothing wrong, she just shows up, has dancers who aren't doing anything provocative. She's not doing anything provocative. She's just singing her song. She's not making any statements whatsoever, right, left, center, whatever. She's just there being an entertaining, and then you're just nitpicking. So this comes off to people. Conservatives are just annoying because they just can't enjoy anything. And then she was saying, like, this is why, this is why when people like Rihanna do something like this, just show up, entertain, and just don't do anything else, this is why they should be praised.
Yeah.
Especially from conservatives, because if you just can't enjoy something, it just comes off. You just come off as an annoying person all the time, and you're just going to lose.
Yeah, so, I think part of the problem is that a lot of conservatives, and I can understand this, are just, the Super Bowl is so highly run by corporations now that we're all expecting to be offended in some capacity by these corporations, and now run, well, not just Super Bowl, but virtually everything. It's a corporate world gone mad in this capitalist system. Well, it's actually a hybrid system. I don't call it capitalism anymore. But we've seen the power of the corporations rise in America now over the past 40, 50 years. Unfortunately for our friends on the right, they realized it too late. There were some of us screaming from the rooftops, at least I was a decade ago, saying, wait a minute, all this power in the name of freedom and liberty going to corporations, it's a problem. It's a problem. And now all of a sudden, they're having issues with it all of a sudden. It's not freedom and liberty anymore. It's fascism. Okay. Of course, that's not really the definition of fascism, but I get what they're trying to prove. And I think there's a heightened insecurity with conservatives right now, and they're just waiting to be offended, and they're reacting to that probably poorly at times.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Okay. And finally,
I would even say what I do know is apparently the commercials for the Super Bowl were woke. I didn't see any of them. I just saw a lot of the reports that the commercials were super woke. So I'm kind of glad that I missed the Super Bowl.
Well, there you go. Okay. And finally, last story. I really don't know who this gentleman is, but Sam Smith does a satanic seance at the Grammys. Julien, he comes out and they're all worshiping the devil, apparently. Hollywood is at the Grammys. And listen, Julien, I don't know what to make of it. I know it was flown all over social media and things like that. I guess I'm jaundiced to that because it's not the first time that's happened. I mean, I think Katy Perry did something like that a few years back at a Super Bowl or something like that. But it's Hollywood. I've always suspected there's some dark elements of a spiritual nature in Hollywood. But again, it seems like with Christianity kind of fading in America and throughout the West, certain satanic elements are rising and becoming more bold. They're really being thrown in our face there, Julien. Your thoughts?
I think this, I've heard about this, what Sam Smith did. I think it has more to do with Sam Smith just being more provocative, trying to get attention.
And he did that.
And that's what he did. I mean, I didn't watch the Grammys. Had no idea the Grammys were like 2 weeks ago. What I do know is that the Grammys had the lowest ratings this past Grammy season. Nobody is tuning into a lot of these award shows. If you haven't noticed, I mean, I used to be, I wouldn't say obsessed, but I used to be very into pop culture. So I would watch a lot of these award shows. I would watch a lot of these shows. I would listen to a lot of things, even if I didn't like it, just so I could be able to, critique it from a, armchair critical point of view, especially during award season. and I just after a while I just stopped watching, being really into pop culture, and I also stopped being into the award seasons just because I just didn't have time. It became so
Yeah.
bland, and it was all the same. And uh, even if you notice, the more provocative, like somebody like Sam Smith becomes, yeah, they're making all these headlines, but nobody actually really tuned in and saw it live. They're just watching the replays. You know, I again, I think a lot of it is the chattering classes are talking about it, and so therefore we know about it. But again, I don't know a single person who actually watched the Grammys.
Yeah, I don't watch the Grammys either. I just saw all the haywire, whatever you want to call it, coming through my Facebook and Twitter feed and things like that, and everybody's going ballistic at it. It's a lot of people right of center that are pointing out, okay, here it is, right? Proof that Satan controls Hollywood. I think to some extent there's
I
some
don't
truth
know.
to.
I don't. Again, I don't know. How like satanic this is. I mean, I don't
Right,
spend my I don't spend my time obsessing about satanic things in the media or whatever. I mean,
right.
it
To
could have been
what?
it could have been a real satanic seance. It could be he could
Right.
just be doing this to be provocative or whatever to because Sam Smith he came out with new music. He came out with a new music video, and this is what Sam Smith is doing. I mean, if I'm not sure if you've followed his career, but he came out, and he used to be gay, and he came out with this song that was like ad nauseum. I'm not the only one. And it would play forever for like half the year. This was probably like 6, 7 years ago, 8, maybe 10 years ago. Um, and then a few years back, Sam Smith came out as non-binary. It's just I don't necessarily think that Sam Smith is a Satanist or, is doing a real satanic ritual. What he is doing is just he's he is a entertainer and he is a singer and he is a person that wants attention. And that is what he's doing. He is seeking attention and that is what he's getting. We are here talking about him right now and he has succeeded in doing what he set out to do. I'm going to get people to talk about me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he did that. Listen, I don't know to what element of satanic worship this really rises. I agree with you, but the fact that it is, even at the very least, softly being promoted, the image being filtered out through the whole country, obviously, is still somewhat problematic. That, at the very least, basic standards of shame and blame have broken down, and there is at least a soft element of satanic. I guess they're getting the message out. Let's put it that way. Now, for me, of course, like I said, it's not the first time we've seen this. We've seen other Hollywood stars. I think Lady Gaga did something like this as well too at one time, as I mentioned earlier, Katy Perry. So Hollywood is moving in this direction. To what degree is this satanic worship? I do believe there's something nefarious, something devious, something rotten in Hollywood. And I do believe there's something there, though I can't quite pinpoint it to what degree it's satanic worship. I won't go that far. But it's like I always point out to my friends on the right, okay, but what's the problem here? This is religious liberty, is it not? This is what the founding fathers gave us. And we've had supposed Americans and supposed, no, not supposed, but Americans and supposed Christians create and concoct lots of various religions since the enshrinement of the First Amendment, right? We saw the explosion of all these denominations. The one generation after the Constitution of the United States was ratified, for Mormonism to Jehovah's Witnesses to a bunch of other really unorthodox forms of Christianity that many people will say at their origins, Julian, these are satanic, Julian. So what was Sam Smith's crime here?
I don't know. I mean, when you paint it in that perspective, I don't think there really is a crime committed here.
And that's the sad part about it, because it shows you the inherent flaw of the concept of religious liberty, something that I've railed against. And now, when I say I don't believe in religious liberty, I'm not saying that I don't believe people have a right to follow their conscience, but all religions are not equal, Julian. And the old world understood this, Julian. You know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, not all religions have a right to, exist on a national stage.
Yeah. Yeah. So error has no rights. I mean, we have heresy on display, and this is really the next logical conclusion, right? I mean, we're seeing satanic temples go up all over the country now. It's happening more and more, and really, what can you do to stop it? And how long before? Okay, and you hear the satanic groups making the arguments that, okay, we got to take the Ten Commandments out, or you got to allow us to have our own documents up at some courthouse or whatever it may be. They're making a religious argument because the founding fathers never distinguished between true religion and and fake religion, for that matter. And essentially, when they separated church and state, they divided the body and the soul. And I believe that's the problem that we have in America today, and why ultimately we're at each other's throats, because our culture, our common values, our traditions, our morals, they all come from different areas and from different kind of perspectives and religions now that have divided us throughout all of history. And it's really culminated now to a point where it's madness. And I think this confusion of religion really goes back to the founding of the nation, Julian. I hate to say that, but that's just what I think it is.
I mean, this country was built by religious dissenters who dissented against the national church in England. And they built their ethos around always being for religious dissent. But what happens when dissent is not bad. You always want dissent does bring about good things. But when you constantly have, an ethos of always dissenting against everything,
Yeah.
It does not breed well in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're at now. And we've been a nation in a constant state of revolution. It's like I've always said, Julian, it's strange, again, as somebody who comes from a European culture where families are honored and venerated in many ways, where rebellion against the family itself does exist. In America, I don't think there's ever been one generation that has not rebelled against their parents. I mean, maybe if you go back to the 19th centuries, maybe, but at least in the 20th century, every generation rebels against their parents and their grandparents, and that's really the nature of American democracy and liberty and freedom and all that stuff. So, my friend, last thoughts for the night. Great conversation.
I don't really think I have any other thoughts.
Well, I think we hit it up pretty good here. Just a broad array of topics, I guess you can say. So I want to thank you again, my friend, for joining me tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, just frankly speaking, I want to thank you for joining us. I'll talk to you later. Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.